Welcome to the second day of the conference. I'm Shiping Shea, the program chair of the conference. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Ravi Sandhu. Ravi is a director and a professor of the Institute for Cybersecurity at UT San Antonio. Before joining UT San Antonio, he was a professor at George Mason and Ohio State University for many years. He's a fellow of IEEE, a fellow of ACM and AAS. So he has quite a few honors. He also received a lot of awards from IEEE, including IEEE Computer Society Technical Achieve Award and ACM 6 Act Outstanding Contribution Award. Amazingly, he's also a highly cited author. One of his paper was cited over 3,000 times. Can you imagine? He's one of the two highly cited authors in access control. He's also the founding editor-in-chief of ACM Transaction on Information System Security. He also founded a very famous security conference, so-called ACM CCS. So he has been active in security area for many, many years. It's quite an honor to have him here. Let's welcome Ravi Sandhu.
Shiping, thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's good to be back in NIST. It's been several years since I've had an opportunity to attend a conference here. It's always a pleasant environment. It's also good to talk to people outside the direct core security community, which is mostly what I interact with. So it's a pleasure to sort of broaden my own horizons a little bit. And I look forward to attending the rest of the conference. So the talk is on the future of access control, attributes, automation, and adaptation. And I'm going to start by giving a few comments about cybersecurity in general, and then I will shift to talking about access control. I think these are more or less facts on which, at least so far, I have not found people disputing these assertions. The cyber world is going to become much more complex and consequently much more confused, because there is so much a rapid pace of development in technology. And if you just look back 10 years and you see where we are today and you project ahead another 10 years, and it's not even possible to look much beyond that time frame, the world is going to be very, very different. And there's going to be, most of the change is going to be innovation driven. It's going to be industry driven. And I hope academics have some role to play in it, other than producing people who can take jobs in industry. So this is just the normal state of affairs, that things are going to be complex and confused and rapidly changing. And in general, this is a very good thing. Cyber technologies bring with them privacy issues, which is probably the biggest drawback of cyber as one of the things that affects the ordinary citizen. And we are seeing some of that play out in the latest disclosures that have made the headlines over the past week or two. So privacy is one issue. The other issue is we sort of become dependent on cyber more and more, and it's not clear that our infrastructure is that robust. So as our critical infrastructure starts depending more and more on cyber, we become more vulnerable. At the same time, the proliferation of cyber technologies leads to productivity and efficiency in almost every aspect of human activity. Energy, health, transportation, they all need more and more cyber. I mean, not exclusively cyber. They need innovation in their own domains too, but they will also be relying a lot on increased usage of cyber technologies to gain the full benefits that can be provided. So the third point is that it's going to be messy, but hopefully it's not going to be chaotic. We can still get our hands around it, and we can still keep some kind of scientific discipline, engineering discipline going so that it's not completely chaotic. Somehow, as innovation presses ahead, things will start following some orderly pattern. Not always at the cutting edge, but behind the cutting edge, things should fall into order over time. And the final point, it's a sort of depressing situation for academics that, to a large degree, our research and what we preach about practice is increasingly out of tune with what's happening in the real world. And how do we remain relevant in this age of very, very rapid technological change? How do we adapt our theories and paradigms quickly enough? And I think by and large, it's not just in cybersecurity. In a lot of computer science and systems, people are feeling that, of course, I can speak most closely to the security domain, but somehow the academic research and practice are losing relevance, and we are becoming producers of young people who then get jobs in industry and go and do nice things. So if you want to do more than that, we have to kind of reorient our research and practice to some degree. So those are some general comments, and I doubt if anyone will seriously argue against any of these observations. It's just the state of affairs is here. Now, I would just briefly make this distinction between cybersecurity in the micro scale and in the macro scale. In the micro scale, cybersecurity is about your home network, about your PC, about your device, or if you're a company, well, small company, maybe it's about your company. Even if you're a large company, it's about your company. So just like microeconomics is about a single firm and its business decisions, microsecurity is about that level of scale. And then macro security is at the sort of scale of macroeconomics, where, even today, governments are having a hell of a time trying to figure out how to guide macroeconomics. So in general, I believe at the micro security level, things are not too bad. Generally, we know how to be reasonably safe in cyberspace. We know as an individual firm what you can do and to, what degree you can sort of invest in protecting yourself. But it's the aggregate threat that is really, a little scary. And it's also true that what can be a rational behavior at the micro level in aggregate can turn out to be very damaging at the macro level. So these are just some observations I wanted to throw out. Most of, I have a couple more slides, and we'll be talking mostly about micro security because that's what is mostly studied. There's very little study of macro security as such because it's not an easy domain to study. And in some ways, it's okay for me to have a bot on my home PC as long as the bot doesn't damage me. But an aggregated botnet can create a lot of damage in the cyber world at large without necessarily causing me personally a lot of damage. So, why should I bother about it? That's the point. So what should be a goal for cybersecurity researchers and practitioners? And one would like to do this. We would like to say, somehow we need to develop a science, a discipline, an engineering discipline, a scientific discipline that allows system builders and operators to assert this system is secure. Okay, that's our sort of holy grail. Unfortunately, this is not possible. So I'm again going to, everybody kind of acknowledges that absolute security is not possible. And this statement is kind of calling for absolute security. And there's always the next low-hanging attack. There is an infinite supply of attacks. the attackers in the wild have only exploited a very small number of attack techniques. They only need to escalate as far as the defenses have been deployed. They don't need to escalate faster than that. And it doesn't matter how strict you get, there's always going to be the next easy attack. So the low-hanging fruit is the next easy attack. And you really don't have this situation where there is a big gap. You know, you close this much, and now to get to the next low-hanging fruit, you have to jump 20 stories. I don't think that situation exists. The next attack is always within reach of the attacker. They just have to go a little bit further and reach out for it. So we are never going to have absolute security. And to treat our discipline as one that seeks to enable this kind of statement is a mistaken goal. And we should be a little more modest, and we need to say that the system is secure enough. Rather than saying that this system is secure, we need a discipline that will allow us to say that the system is secure enough. And if you look back here, there's hardly any example. I mean, if it's not attainable, then it obviously cannot have examples that do this. And we have seen, in fact, the latest, I mean, ultimately the insider is going to be your, when it comes down to it, one of your biggest threats is the insider, as has been demonstrated recently in the leaks about the NSA intelligence gathering efforts. So the system is secure enough. I'm going to say that we have many, many successful examples of this. Many. In fact, you can, we use these, at the consumer level, we use many of these systems on a daily basis. The automatic teller machine network, it's not secure. There are a number of problems with it, but it is secure enough. And what is the evidence for saying it is secure enough? Well, its deployment is growing. It's global. You don't find people abandoning it and running away from it. So its adoption is growing. Its pervasive availability is growing. And people are not abandoning it. And banks are not abandoning it. So something must be working. And if you look at the actual numbers regarding losses and so on, it's not easy to get those numbers because they are not widely publicized. You will see that given the savings and productivity advantages given by the ATM network, the losses are very tolerable. Okay, and that's why they are being tolerated. So that's one example. Online banking I'll offer as another example. And e-commerce is another one. And you can go, probably come up with other consumer level interactions in cyberspace. And most of these, this particular list that I have here is all consumer oriented, it's mass scale, it's sort of retail level security, and it generally tends to be of somewhat low assurance. And that's probably going to be the case. You're never going to get high assurance for these kinds of systems. You're going to get an adequate amount of assurance. A lot of the safeguards in these systems are not necessarily technical, they are procedural. And there is, why is the ATM network successful? Because it limits how much you can take out over a given period of time. And that in itself is a very big limitation. And yes, there have been some very dramatic, in fact, there was this recent ATM theft where they withdrew tens of millions of dollars from prepaid debit cards. So it wasn't even individual accounts. They actually stole the money from the bank. And they got, they penetrated the bank network and they were able to extract the money. But they had to go down Manhattan, go to lots and lots of ATMs to get the money out. And at each ATM, the perpetrators were photographed. So, they were able to conduct that scale of theft, but it's a one-time deal. And they were caught. It's not a repeatable crime. And So anyway, the general point is that these are sort of low assurance, retail level systems, and that's probably the best we are going to get of that class of systems. When you're talking about retail level, mass consumer, I am quite confident in predicting that you will never be willing to pay the price and the inconvenience to get high assurance. It's not going to happen. Okay, and I believe the empirical evidence bears me out, because there's a moving target here. We expect over time that these things will get more secured, because the attackers will keep escalating their attack, but we will never get much more than secure enough. And the secure enough has to be measured at an aggregate scale by adoption and by net savings to the industry and net benefit to society. And there's going to be some cost. Some people are going to get hurt. And if you are one of those unlucky ones, tough luck. Maybe there will be some recourse for you, but the recourse usually is not sufficient to compensate you for all the inconvenience and everything else you have to bear. Okay, and I use these systems, and I've had occasional incidents where my accounts have been compromised here and there, and it's not fun. Okay, but mostly the criminals can only damage small number of people. They cannot damage the whole at the retail level. At the macro level, if you can bring down the whole financial system, if you can bring down the whole ATM network, that's a different level of threat. And that's a cyber war, nation state kind of attacker that you're worried about. The last bullet here, so when I say there are many successful examples of this system is secure enough, well, not all of them are at the retail mass level. That's the point of this last example. The president's nuclear football, which he doesn't physically carry it himself. He has a colonel carrying it in. The nuclear football is a little briefcase from which nuclear weapons can be launched by the US president anywhere in the world. So there's clearly a cyber component to it. There's communication, there's computers, there's a whole command and control system behind it. So there's a lot of cyber there. We need extremely high assurance of this thing. And in over 60 years maybe now, I lose count very quickly of decades these days. It's been around for a long time. And so far we haven't had a false launch. At least that has been demonstrated. That nobody has been able to hijack the system and actually launch nuclear weapons. In fact, it looks like nobody has even come close to it. It's not even clear if anyone has tried. Okay, but certainly the empirical evidence is there. We haven't had a nuclear holocaust yet. And on the other side, if the president actually wanted to launch something, would they actually launch? Well, so far we haven't had to test that side of the coin, but presumably there's some mechanism they do some kind of means of assuring themselves that should the need to launch actually come about, that it will take place. Okay, so we do have empirical evidence on one side. On the other side, we have at best we rely on the government's word that it will work. But my point is that it is possible to achieve this system is secure enough, even for very high assurance and very, very, very critical systems. It may be very costly. It may be a one-of-a-kind system. And is it completely secure? Well, if your president goes mad, you just got to look at some of the Hollywood movies. Presidents do go mad. Maybe he'll launch anyway. Okay, that's the ultimate insider attack in that situation. Or he may be blackmailed into doing something, or he may have a gun to his head. He may not be mad, but he may be coerced into something. So, there are vulnerabilities in this system. And maybe there are cyber vulnerabilities. It's not just the insider human being vulnerability. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that there are cracks in this system, and I'm sure there are mitigation processes for it. But nonetheless, is this system secure? I don't think we can make that assertion about any system. So, so having made all these observations, here is the situation in academia and in the scientific aspects and engineering aspects of our discipline. We don't really teach these as case studies of success. Now, if you go to Harvard, they will tell you, here is, if you go to their business school, they'll tell you, here are successful case studies and here are case studies of unsuccessful companies, and you can learn a lot by studying them. We tend to ignore these things. I don't think there's a single security course that I have seen or a security book which will try to analyze why the ATM network is successful, why online banking today is reasonably is secure enough. Okay, so we don't even look at it as a success story. We tend to look at these as, if we study these systems, it's mostly with the viewpoint of, hey, here are all the vulnerabilities in the system, here are the ways I can exploit it, and here's some fancy new mechanics that I could introduce to close those holes. The second point is actually even more depressing a little bit, that we really don't know how to build these kinds of systems. Clearly they are buildable. And clearly there must be some methodology used by the people who put these systems together. Maybe some of them are more planned than others. Others just came about. Our current online banking system is, in the US, you have more than 8,000 banks. So it isn't like there was one standard that somebody put out and said everybody has to do this. So, a lot of these systems have been built bottom up by many, many companies agreeing to do things in a certain way, but they've all converged towards a fairly common solution. And by definition, the ATM network has to be interoperable. Otherwise, you don't deliver the service that you're promising. You can get to your money from any terminal in the world, right? So we really don't even think about the discipline required to build these kinds of systems. We are, as computer scientists, I assume most of the people in the room are computer scientists or computer engineers. We tend to kind of focus on closing more and more vulnerabilities. That's the so perhaps, hopefully, this will change. Okay, and change always comes from the younger people. The old people are too old to change. So, so hopefully, the youngsters in the room will take some inspiration. And so ultimately, cybersecurity is about trade-offs. That's really. I think we've kind of. I won't spend more time on this slide. So let me move on to access control, having given sort of my 100,000-foot perspective on the state of cybersecurity. So when you look at access control is one of the core features of a security system, because it controls who can do what in the system and who can access what, and that's fundamental. Ultimately, that's how you're going to protect information. And part of the surprise in this latest leak of Eric Snowden is how did he have access to information which really he had no need to know. So they're kind of not able, and the previous WikiLeaks from Mr. Manning, he was able to get a lot of information, just because he had a high-level clearance. Shouldn't give him entitlement to look at all of that stuff. So we are, not being very successful, even in our most, presumably the Defense Department and the intelligence agencies are the ones who are most worried about such things and are putting in resources there. So access control is important, and it continues to be a point of failure. Before an insider can abuse their privileges, typically they already have more access than they should. And we have failed in trying to kind of constrain their access. So there have been many, many access control models published, hundreds maybe. But only 3 have been reasonably successful. 2 of them go back to the very beginning of this age of multi-user computing. discretionary access control and mandatory access control. They roughly emerged around the same time, 1970, and that was the beginning of the age of multi-user computers. Now, of course, we have multi-user internet. We have much, much bigger and global scale, but these two fundamental ideas emerged fairly early. Discretionary access control kind of says, there's somebody who owns the information. If I create a file, I own it. Or if it's part of an enterprise, then maybe the enterprise owns the file and somebody is delegated to manage it. And it's up to the owner of the resource to determine who should access it. That's the discretionary part of it. It's driven by ownership, and ownership may be resulting from creating something, or it may be something that you are given because of your position in the organization. The problem with discretionary access control is you can own the original, but once I let you read it, you own the copy. Okay, it's a very, very simple, and it's a sort of fatal flaw in discretionary access control, which has been known for 40 years now. There's nothing new here. I own the information, but once I give it to you, well, you don't own the original copy, but you can make your own copy. If you can read it, you can make a copy, and you own the copy. And now, who has discretion over the copy? It's you. All right. So there is no control on what is done with copies of information. There's absolutely no control. Discretionary access control doesn't do anything in that regard. And more recently, people have tried to do digital rights management and similar kinds of technology, where I give you the bits, but you're not free to do whatever you want with them. But by and large, those technologies have not been successful. And they've not been successful as business models, and they have not been successful as technologies, because ultimately, if you can play something on if you have bits on your own computer, you can always capture them. Even if the file is encrypted, at some point it has to be decrypted to make use of it. So if you're talking about a piece of music, when you play it, it has to be played in analog clear text, and then you can capture it there. So there's always the analog whole available. So, discretionary access control has limitations. Those limitations have been known for a long time. And mandatory access control was invented to kind of work around those limitations. Main idea is that you have to keep some information for each copy. So if I give you a piece of top secret information, you can make a copy of it, but the copy is also going to be labeled top secret. So you cannot make a lower classification copy of a top secret document. That is the core idea of mandatory access control. I am acknowledging that copying is possible, but I'm going to put some technology in there which will make sure that labels propagate with the copies. So I give you top secret information, you can proliferate copies of it, but you can only send those copies to top secret computers and top secret people. You cannot send it to unclassified computers and unclassified people. I mean, that's the theory. That's the principle on which these things are built. Of course, as it turns out, it is possible to actually, if human beings can make copies on thumb drives and on CDs, they can actually make unclassified copies. So the controls are not strong enough, but at least in principle, those controls should work. In practice, the controls are never going to be that strong. There's going to be some way of circumventing them. And we have seen highly publicized cases where the US government has been caught with information leaks from very, very sensitive systems. So discretionary and mandatory access control were the main ideas for about 25 years. And then role-based access control was invented. In many ways, the ideas of role-based access control had been around for almost that 25-year period, but they were not systemized, they were not kind of formally treated until 1995. That's a big gap. 25 years is a long time in computer science and systems. It's kind of surprising that it took so long. And the idea of role-based access control was, well, mandatory access control is worried about copies. Discretionary access control is worried about ownership. Role-based access control is more concerned about the enterprise. It really did emerge from the enterprise. And the idea is that if you're a professor, you get certain privileges. If you're a student, you get other privileges. If you're a payroll clerk, you get some privileges. If you're a payroll supervisor, you get different privileges. So your privileges are kind of determined by your role in the organization. It's a very simple idea, very simple to explain at its core. Of course, there's lots of elaboration. Computer scientists are clever people. They come up with nice formalisms and all kinds of bells and whistles to put around this very simple and basic idea. And in 1995, sort of role-based access control was rolled out, and 2004 there was the NIST standard model that was adopted 9 years, and it's been pretty successful. Most commercial systems today at least claim to be supporting role-based access control. Some of them claim to be supporting the NIST standard. But the next generation attribute-based access control is not a new idea. It's been around for a long time. Just like role-based access control was not new as an idea in 1995. Okay? It's actually, as an idea, it had been around for almost as long as these two. But it had never been seriously pursued and systematically studied and formally defined. That took a long time. Attribute-based access control is in somewhat of that same kind of situation. The idea of attribute-based access control is that, okay, role is just one attribute. You can have other attributes. Even if you look at it from an enterprise point of view, you can have a role as a professor, but you may have a qualification, you may have years of experience, you may have all kinds of other attributes that are also significant when it comes to making access control decisions. So instead of just focusing on a role as the only attribute of interest, we can focus on many, many different attributes. Your gender may be relevant, your title may be relevant, and so on. So attributes, in one way of viewing attribute-based access control is that it generalizes beyond roles to include any attribute that may be relevant. Okay, so it's very open-ended, and we can, an attribute could be a security label, and so on. So it allows us to unify previous ways of thinking about access control as well as to generalize. And in some form or another, attribute access control has been around at least for 20 years. You can find references in the literature that talk about attributes going back to the early 90s. And probably if you dig enough, you'll find something even a little older than that. So nonetheless, it hasn't been yet formalized or systematically studied. Different aspects of it have been studied. But there isn't a, in RBAC, we can point to, especially with the NIST standard model, we can point to a particular place and say, this is what RBAC is generally viewed to be. Okay? With ABAC, we don't have that status yet. The NIST has just recently issued a draft special publication. So it's not a standard, but it's a special publication which tries to give some common definition of ABAC. And that document is out for comment, and they're going to. So NIST has taken the first step towards trying to standardize ABAC concepts within the domain of what NIST does. And there are other standards that have been built around ABAC. There's XACML, there's X.509 attribute certificates, and so on. So attributes have been treated in different ways in the literature, but there still isn't unlike in RBAC or MAC or DAC, there isn't a consensus model that has been accepted by the community. Or, if I want to say if somebody tells me I need to read up on DAC, MAC, and RBAC, I can point you to 2, 3, 4 papers, and that will give you a good start. In ABAC, we don't have that situation yet because the domain is still very confused. And we are now in that process. So maybe if it took 25 years to get to a good status about RBAC, we are now 18 years after that. So maybe it's the right time frame to get our handle around ABAC. And the fact that NIST has taken this step towards trying to standardize some terminology and concepts in that area may be an indication that sometimes there's the right time to do something. And if you do it prematurely, maybe you are too early, okay? It's probably the right time to formalize ABAC. So one of the things, there are many aspects on which one could say what has changed in this regard. Going from fixed policy to flexible policy, going from human-driven to automated and adaptive. And, I have a title which has automation and adaptation in it. This is the only slide which mentions these two terms, more or less. But traditionally, access control has been thought of as something that is administered. Somebody configures who can access what. In discretionary access control, it is left up to the owners to configure it. So as the owner of a piece of information, I decide who gets to access. Maybe I follow some guidelines given to me by the organization. Maybe I just follow my own free choice. Okay? But it's my decision. And nonetheless, it's a user activity. Somebody has to actually push some buttons to grant that access. In mandatory access control, I have to put some labels on users, on objects, on networks, on databases. So somebody has to go around and label everything. And whenever a new user is brought into the system, they have to be given a label. And that's a very labor-intensive, slow, costly, error-prone activity. Okay, and role-based access control also tends to have this flavor because it emerged from the enterprise. Somebody is going to have to assign you the role, and somebody is going to have to determine what this role can do. And these all tend to go back to a human being. And those human beings are often ill-informed about what they should be doing. I mean, if you ask me what role should shipping get, I don't know. How am I to know? Maybe the HR people know that. Maybe some other administrator knows that. So it's sort of not clear how organizations, of course, organizations are doing these kinds of things. But to a large extent, they are relying on human beings to do it. Okay. And that's not a good, computers and human beings mix very well. But if you put the human in the loop on lots of decisions that a computer needs to make, that's not good. That's just going to slow down everything. So we need a lot more automated decision making. Attributes are kind of good for that sort of thing because I can write policies based on attributes which can automate my decision making. And those policies can be separated out from the actual granting of attributes to individual users and objects. So the fact that shipping is a professor at a university in Taiwan, I don't need to worry about how those attributes were granted to him. But I can make use of those attributes in writing policies that will allow him access to various things in the domain of my control. So it's not as easy as I make it sound because it's very easy to lose control over what is actually being granted access. But, attribute-based access control has this flavor of being more automatable than traditional MAC, DAC, and RBAC. And it can be adaptive because I can bring in attributes of the environment. So I can say we are under code red. And now my decision rules will factor that in somehow. So it's not only attributes of the user and the object that is being accessed, it's also attributes of the system, attributes of the environment. I can attach attributes to the user, not only intrinsically what the user is, but if the user is coming from a foreign network or from an internal network, I can distinguish that through attributes. I can distinguish the device that they're coming through. So I can bring in a lot of factors into play when I make my access decisions. And that's the adaptive aspect of it. And attribute-based access control has this flavor. I will kind of, in the interest of time, just cover a couple of more slides. If you look at role-based, so role-based access control has been successful. But its limitations, so it started in, we put 1995 just for, well, plus minus 1 year or 2 years, doesn't matter at this point. So, but starting almost from the beginning, there's been criticism about various aspects and limitations of RBAC. That's the main point of this slide. And at the end of the day, to fix each one of these, it looks like you have to tweak RBAC in some direction or the other. It is not an inherently extensible framework. That's one of the sort of, if you look at, this is my perspective, the ultimate limitation of RBAC is that it doesn't have a built-in extensibility framework, whereas ABAC offers you that. So you don't need to, if you run into some limitation of ABAC, there are, well, you add some more attributes, you add attributes to more things, you enrich your policy language, and there are places within the ABAC framework where you can enhance your capabilities without having to fundamentally re-engineer the whole framework. And that's probably the biggest benefit of ABAC. Of course, right now we don't have an agreed consensus model for ABAC. That's probably one of the biggest things holding back effective large-scale deployment of ABAC. And the fact that NIST is taking a step in that direction is an encouraging sign. But a lot more needs to be done, and a lot more needs to be done by the research community. And it is one of the things about role-based access control is that it wanted to keep things very simple. So the idea of a role is that everybody in the role is treated more or less the same. So if you're a professor, you're a professor. It doesn't matter whether you're shipping or Ravi Sandhu. It doesn't matter. You're a professor. And that's what's going to enable your privileges. With attributes, we are kind of making more complexity. So we are professors, but he is a professor in one way, I'm a professor in another way. So I'm going to start recognizing our differences more and more. And that kind of, the access control logic, the policy in RBAC is very, very simple. If you have a particular role assigned to you and some permission is assigned to that role, you can use that permission. That is the only rule, more or less, that you need in RBAC. So it's a very simple access control enforcement. In ABAC, the access control enforcement is much more complex. So I'm saying, all right, you have these attributes. The object you're trying to access has these other attributes. And I'm going to do some computation which will kind of match these against each other. And that matching is going to be expressed by some computer program. Okay, maybe it's a restricted kind of computer program, but ultimately it isn't a fixed decision rule. That is the biggest difference between ABAC and RBAC. In RBAC, your access control decision rule is fixed. If you have the role and the role has the permission, end of the discussion. If you don't have a role which has the correct permission that you're trying to exercise, sorry, can't do it. All right, so it's easy for me to kind of figure out, much easier for me to figure out, everything is relative, what exactly you're allowed to access. If I give you a role, I can kind of compute quite fairly easily what it is that I'm giving you. With attributes, if I change your attribute, it's not clear. Am I actually increasing your access? Am I decreasing it? Am I increasing it here, decreasing it there? And if I change my policy, now my policy becomes under control of the security architect. It's no longer fixed. And therefore, we need to be careful. And we've done some work in this area. We have tried to, with roles, the two basic decisions that need to be made is, if you have a user, what are the roles this user should have? And if you have a role, what are the permissions this role should have? And those are the two basic decisions you need to make. With attributes, you have to kind of, there are many different kinds of policies that can be written. So it makes the situation much more complex. We probably need to introduce that kind of complexity in order to attain the level of automation and adaptation that is going to be necessary in cyberspace. So I'd like to leave a little bit of time for some questions. I didn't go through all the slides, but I think I've conveyed the main points of my story to you. And I hope some of you will be excited and encouraged to look into ABAC as a topic to investigate. Also, if you have to do any kind of access control, maybe ABAC is an alternative way. And if roles are good enough, then there's no reason to do ABAC. But you may want to look at ABAC as an alternative. So, any comments or questions? Yeah, I think you can.
Okay. My name is Christian Hansen. I'm not a computer scientist, so excuse me if this is a dumb question. But coming back to you, when you talked about secure enough, is it correct to say that if you look at like the ATM networks, that the cost of making it more secure would be more than the cost you're saving by avoiding potential attacks?
That's one measure that, that's a little bit like marginal utility of, if I, in fact, US actually has most of our ATM, well, all our ATM cards don't have the smart chip on them. And a lot of European cards and a lot of foreign ATM cards now, I don't know, we have a lot of people from outside US here. So most of you have a chip on your card, whereas in the US, it's almost 0% because our machines are not updated yet to accommodate that. And I think the ATM operators realize that this is probably the one biggest benefit they could get, because it would eliminate a whole lot of skimming and fake ATM cards and things like that. But if you think of the cost of doing that, then they look at how much they're actually losing, and doesn't make sense right now to replace them all. As an individual citizen, it has become a pain for me because some of the foreign ATM machines do not accept the US ATM card anymore. They say, you don't have a chip card, go to another machine. So that's bad, And maybe that'll bring some pressure on so maybe the US operators will have to issue you a special ATM card for travel abroad or something. Maybe that's the fix for that problem. But, another aspect of the ATM, the ATM is a very, very interesting case study actually, because initially they were only deployed in bank branches and they were under constant camera surveillance at least. Then they kind of proliferated all over. Now you find them in not so friendly neighborhoods around the, you find them in lots and lots of places, convenience stores and places like that. And then that sort of increased. So in one way, it was beneficial to the operators, because with more machines they make a little bit on each transaction, so they can make a lot more money. But at the same time, the prevalence of theft also went up tremendously. And in Texas, there were, well, I'm sure this happened elsewhere too. I read the local news in Texas since I'm a resident there. There have been a couple of incidents where ATM at a gas station in some somewhat remote place, and they bring a backhoe and they just take the whole thing out. So, I mean, you know, so when you talk about secure enough, I mean, are you really there? What are you going to protect against? Another observation worth making about ATM is that it actually has no privacy built in. In fact, it has the opposite of privacy. There is a lot of accountability there. So there's a pretty strong trail of evidence that a card with that kind of number was used and the PIN was used. And it doesn't use any public key cryptography. All the cryptography in the ATM network is more or less symmetric key. And, you know, so, you know, it's if you, I mean, we've been preaching public key cryptography is the answer to everything, but not necessarily.
Rob, maybe I speak to an audience so that they can hear me. You know, internet attack become a serious threat to internet users, and you know, basically we count down firewall to protect us. It seems to me, you know, airbag can be very powerful and to make the firewall setting more flexible in certain way. So, you know, right now the setting, you know, is kind of fixed. You know, they control, you know, certain source coming in or going out, but it's kind of fixed. Do you think airbag can make firewall more flexible, more powerful in certain way?
And that's, you see, as security researchers, we tend to believe that giving more flexibility to the user is always a good thing. Putting more responsibility on the user, saying that, okay, you configure your own firewall, or you configure your own rules, or in a social network, you figure out, you know, friends of friends of friends, how far people can see things and so on. But users generally tend not to make good decisions. So as security professionals, you know, sometimes we may want to take the decisions away from the user and sort of give them a smaller set of choices. So I am a little skeptical. You know, I've done a lot of work in trying to, like, we've done some work in social networking, and we come up with this sort of very, it's pretty, but I don't see any user trying to actually get so fine-grained and so complicated about who can access what in their social network. So users need simplicity, and somehow the industry has to deliver that simplicity to them. And to a large extent, systems that are successful have, at least in the US, have become successful because users have recourse. So if as a retail user, if you run into problem, typically the online banking, the e-commerce, you know, Amazon will kind of take care of it for you, or the bank will take care of it for you. Now, if you start doing it every month, you know, they'll say this guy, you know, I mean, they'll try to catch you if you're misusing that recourse capability. So how we get usable security and effective security is perhaps the biggest question in designing these kinds of retail level systems. And somehow in some of these systems they figured out a reasonable compromise.
Further questions, you can discuss it offline, or you can discuss it during the break. Now it's about the break time. We prepared this nice souvenir to thank Ravi to give a wonderful talk. Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you. Thank you very much.